Our speaker today is Reverend Lesley Brogan. She's a minister in the United Church of Christ and works at Children's Healthcare at Atlanta. She has written 2 books, Relying on the Moon, Companioning Grief for 29 Days, and Grief in the Psalms, and is ruminating over the 3rd one. Lesley, who was born and raised in Mattoon, Illinois, lives in Decatur, Georgia, with her partner, Linda Ellis. They are moms to Ray Ellis's and Randy Kennedy's favorite nephews, John Brogan and Sam.
Good morning. It is always, always, always a joy to be here, and I'm grateful to be invited back. I think it's the 4th year, perhaps 40th, I don't know. But I think it's wonderful and speaks well to your congregation that you allow Billy to have some time to inhale and, more importantly, to exhale. And you do that with love and wisdom, and I think it speaks to your kindness and compassion and the strength of your congregation. So blessings on you, Sherry, as you begin this time with Billy as well. It's great to be here, and I bring greetings to you from Kirkwood United Church of Christ and from North Decatur Presbyterian. It's wonderful to be given this opportunity to preach. I know that you have the opportunity to do a hymn sing every Sunday, and instead you choose to invite some strangers, some old friends into your congregation. And I am grateful. Let us pray. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable and pleasing in your sight. O God, you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. I'll be preaching this morning from the Gospel of Matthew, and I'm always grateful to be raised in a church that gives us a lectionary text. I'm grateful to know that as a people, whether we be Methodist or Congregationalist or Presbyterian, we go through the church year together, being given the same texts to read together. And we are given different Gospels every 3 years, and this is our year to study Matthew. And Matthew is a text that begins in a roll call of history, begins with a genealogy of Jesus, begins with letting the readers and the hearers know that Jesus comes from a long line beginning with David and takes us through. Matthew lets us know from the lens of Joseph who Jesus is called to be. Matthew begins with Joseph hearing that Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. And Matthew takes us through all the way to the text we heard on Trinity Sunday of the commissioning, the last chapter, that invites us not to sit and watch and worry, but invites us to go and baptize and tell. So this morning's text is from the 11th chapter. And when I was invited, I was so grateful. And when I opened it up, the very first question got my attention and stopped me in my tracks. To what do we compare this generation? To what do we compare this generation? What is this time we are living in? Right now, us. What is this time we are living in? It's a time that takes my breath away most every day. It's a time that makes me question who we are and whose we are often. To what do we compare this generation? As I've been thinking about this Sunday, I was wondering what the average age of this congregation would be on this Sunday. You know, every Sunday is different. Every Sunday is different. And even if we, just us, were here every Sunday, We would be different from week to week. But this Sunday, every Sunday, this Sunday, what is the average age of this congregation, would we guess? Just throw a number out. Under 100, I think we can start. But let's just throw a number out. What would we say? What? 58. 60. I feel like I'm doing an auction. 40. 39 if we're a day. Okay, so let's just, we're bouncing on 40. I think it's interesting. I'm just reflecting. So let's say that the average age is 42. We can go with 42. If we're looking at a person who is age 42, think of what they have lived in and through. Think of the life experiences that they have seen. Think of what has mattered and what continues to matter. Just in this lifetime of 42 years. I think one of the things that is the blessing and the curse of being a baby boomer is that we follow the greatest generation. We follow in the footsteps of those who have gone before, who lived their lives in remarkable ways and turned the mantle over to us. In this generation that we live, think of what we have seen. Think of what we have witnessed. Think of who we have watched. The thing about a generation, and I think we often lose track of it, is that a generation is not a person. Whether he be a hero or she be a villain, a generation is all of us. All of us. And so I think possibly, as I think of people in this generation, we could name Rosa Parks and we could name Nelson Mandela. We should name the courage of John Glenn and the life given of Sally Ride. In our generation, these are heroes, people who walk before us. We can certainly name villains. But think of people events. Perhaps the greatest gift to our generation and lesson is that it's not just us. It's not just us in this room. It's not just us on this block. It's not just us in this community. It's not just us in this state. It's not just us in the South. It's not just us in the United States. This generation, more than any generation before, I think, has learned that we are a global people. And so as I've been trying to think of what is one of the greatest gifts of this generation, I imagine myself living in Berlin in the 60s. Living in Berlin when suddenly sirens happened and trucks drove up and bricks were put on the ground and a wall was built that separated neighbor from neighbor. And they lived that way, East and West Berlin, for years. Sisters, brothers, families, cousins, grandparents, neighbors, friends. And they learned to live with a wall between them. And in our generation, that wall came tumbling down. Perhaps that is one of the greatest events for this generation. And it didn't happen here, but it happened to us. It happened to us. And sometimes when I get really, really, really discouraged about what is going on with us these days in this country, particularly, I find that I lose my way. And again, I am grateful for the Gospel of Matthew because we are a people. We are a people, a pilgrim people. We are people on a journey. And so it's always our gift to turn the page and to read on and to not stop and to not give up. So the first, you're thinking to yourselves, oh dear God, she's still on the first sentence of today's text. And at some point I want to go home and I'm getting a little hungry. So I'm going to move it along. I'm going to go now to the end of the gospel reading of Matthew. Come ye who are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my burden is easy, my way is light. Come ye who are heavy laden. Many of us, when we hear those words, get a place inside us that you took us to, Jennifer. Oh my God, that place of, is it possible to be totally held in God's love place? Oh, that was so fine. And those words are for that, and they are for so much more. Those words are for so much more. We have to remember always that the scriptures were given in a context to a people, and they have been passed along for us. And they speak directly to our lives most every day. And that is the gift of these scriptures. But let's take it back a little bit and find out where originally these words were intended to be. When I heard about the yoke, when I read the words about the yoke, did any of you have what I had? But it was that big, huge thing that oxen wear that's really wooden, and it takes you over here if you don't want to go, and it takes you over here, and it's a little bit burdensome. We have to pull back and remember the whole Gospel of Matthew. And one of Matthew's messages is about wisdom, is about tradition, and we receive it from the incarnate Christ. We receive it from the one who is God living on this earth. So this wisdom comes to a people not so much for individual being held moments, not that it doesn't, but not just particularly for that, but this wisdom comes to all of us. Jesus' message perhaps was meant for the people who were around him, these Jews who lived with tradition and lived with laws. This yoke that they were tied to are the rules that we read in Deuteronomy and Leviticus. These rules that tell us how to dress, what to eat, how to be. These rules that speak of what you can do and what you can't do on the Sabbath. These rules that bind us, and they sure give us a compass, and they sure tell us exactly where our left foot goes and where our right foot goes. But the verse before that is something about Jesus recognizing that we are weary and heavy laden. All of these rules are wearing us out. All of these rules are confining us to being something that we are not, and something that is killing our spirits. Come to me, ye who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. For my yoke is easy, my burden is light. Take this yoke from me and learn from me. Well, what then, if it's not all of these rules, what is it that we are to know? How are we to be? And again, the gift of the gospel is it doesn't stop there. But if we turn the page, and if we go on to the 22nd chapter of Matthew, those of you who are Baptists are turning in your Bibles because you've got them or you've memorized the 22nd chapter of, I could ask Linda what is the 22nd chapter of Matthew, but I won't because that's silly. But so in the 22nd chapter of Matthew, Jesus is meeting with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they are testing him, and they are saying, tell us then, what is the most important law? And Jesus says, and many of us know this, the most important law is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and all your mind. And he says, and your neighbor as yourself. On these two laws, all the laws are hung, and all the words of the prophets live. So the yoke that we are to take upon us is not a whole list of to-do. Instead, it is these two things. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. These two things. This is who we are to be and how we are to live our lives. How simple is that? How easy is that? Well, that doesn't sound really too easy for me. What does it mean? Who is my neighbor? What does that mean to love the Lord our God with all my heart and all my soul and all my mind? What do I do about me and mine? What do I do about the things that I know are true for me and I really need for me to be safe and I really need for me to be secure? What do I do with that? In this lightening of the load, Jesus gives us the biggest thing possible. What's a way in for that? Take my yoke upon me and learn from me. And the words that follow immediately after that, for I am gentle and humble of heart. What would happen if we would just take these two pieces with us to begin, love the Lord your God with all your mind and your soul and your heart, and your neighbor as yourself? Gentleness and humility. Those aren't easy when we get back in our cars and get back on the road and get back to work or get back to school or get on with whatever we're doing. People are going to judge me. People are going to run all over me. I'm going to be ostracized. I'm not going to be the leader if I'm gentle and humble of heart. How do I do that? Take this yoke and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble of heart. Again, a little bit later in Matthew, in chapter 25, when Jesus talks about when you fed the hungry, when you gave the thirsty a drink of water, when you welcome the stranger. We do these little things and we change the world. It's as though we can put down our phones for just a minute and let go of screens for just a minute and stand up a little bit taller, just a minute, and breathe deeply and say, I know now where I'm supposed to go. I know now who I'm supposed to be. I know now what's next. What is the most important piece? Loving God, loving neighbor. It comes down to that time after time, and we know it. We get really busy. We get really busy, and we get really puffed up a little bit. Physician, heal thyself is in the book of Luke, so I don't have to take credit for that one. Because puffed up, you'd probably think, We get too much of us. And I think it's because we've practiced it well, and it's a muscle that's very strong. But it's not what we're called to do. So today we are to take on a new lesson and learn from the teacher who has taught us our whole lives by being gentle and humble of heart. And we will find rest for our souls. And the rest that we find will be these moments that we heard earlier. But the rest that we find will be looking in the eyes of a stranger and seeing their face lose its wrinkles and their shoulders relax. The rest we will find will be to offer a cup of water to somebody that we know is thirsty and to watch the reaction of the rest that they find in our gift. The message is circular. The message is circular. And it's not all about what we have in our hand or what we're typing or what we're watching on TV. That is so instantaneous and short-lived. This Gospel of Matthew we've had for centuries. This Gospel of Matthew. I leave you with one story, getting back to the notion of comparing this generation. There's a story about a small village that had an old woman who lived on the top of the hill in the house, and she was said to be the wisest person in the village. And so when anybody had any problems or any troubles, they would take it to her, and she would always, always, always know what to do. And so this one teenage boy, no disrespect to the teenage boys, because you guys, you're our hope. No pressure. You're our hope. No pressure. You're our hope. But anyway, these teenage boys, one boy in particular, wanted to prove that this woman wasn't so smart. And so he grabbed a buddy and he said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to march right up to her front door and we're going to prove that she's not as smart as everybody says she is. And so many of you have heard this story. So he, as he's walking, his friend says, well, how are we going to prove that she's not so smart? And the bully picks up a sparrow and puts it in his hands. And he says, you know, I'm going to march right up to that door and I'm going to knock on that door and I'm going to say to her, old woman, is this bird living or dead? And then she's going to say, well, the bird is living. And the boy will crush the bird in his hands and show her the dead bird and say, see, you're not so smart. But if the old woman says, the bully says to this friend, if the old woman says the bird is dead, then I'll set the bird free. And either way, she's wrong and I'm right and I'm smarter. And so they walk up, he has the sparrow in his hands, they walk up her steps, the friend knocks on the door and they wait and they hear shuffling, and slowly the door opens and this little old woman looks out and says, hi boys, can I help you? And the friend backs away, but the bully stands tall and he says, old woman, is this bird in my hand living or dead? And the old woman finds the bully's eyes and she looks tenderly into them and she says, oh, my son, the answer is in your hands.